My name's William Phil Roberts. I enlisted in 1968, October 1st. I joined the Marine Corps for 4 years. A funny story about that, if you'd like to hear it. I joined, a friend of mine, Mike Short, joined. And Mike was a very good friend of mine. And he came home one night from work and he said, Bill, I joined the Marine Corps. And I thought, well, Mike, if you can join, I can too. I'm just thinking this. So I went down to the recruiter and I said, I want to go in on the buddy program with Mike Short. He said, no problem. This was 1968. So he said, how long do you want to go in for? And I said, well, I don't know. How long did Mike go in for? And he said, 4 years. And I said, okay. And I signed the paper, enlisted. I came home that night. I said, Mike, I'm going with you. I'm going on the buddy program. By the way, how long did you enlist for? He said, 3 years. Mike and I were together through boot camp, through basic infantry training school, through infantry training regiment, which was a training regiment. We came home on leave together. We went back. We were separated in Da Nang. He went down south and I went up north. Mike was killed on July 6, 1969. When I arrived in Da Nang, the first thing that hit me when they opened the airplane door was this heat, tremendous heat, humidity, tremendous humidity, and the smell of gunpowder. It really struck me. Like I said, Mike and I was separated. When I went to get on a chopper to go to Vandergrift Combat Base, which was also known as LZ Stud, a gentleman there, a Marine, asked me where I was going. I said, well, I'm going up with the 9th Marines. He said, oh, you're going with the Walking Dead. That was a shock. We were on search and destroy missions most of the time. I had a commanding officer that liked to call it reconnaissance in force. In other words, we were out with a pretty large group, a company-sized group. When I got to Vandergrift, there was a period of time, of a week or so, that we acclimated to the weather. Like I said, we were on search and destroy missions most of the time. I was an 0311, which is an infantryman. 2 days before I got shot, we were out humping the jungle, moving in the jungle, and we moved up on this hill, and the lieutenant told us to make a perimeter around this flat area, which we did. And the engineers blew a helipad for the choppers to land. They used C4, they wrapped a tree with C4 and blew the trees down. And then after they blew the helipad, the lieutenant had us move on top of the hill. And that's where we dug in. We dug our foxholes. That night, we were sitting there eating our sea rations, and we heard the sound of toot, toot, toot. It was mortar rounds being fired from the hill next to us. And we got down in our foxholes, waiting for these mortars to come in, and they started coming in, boom, boom, boom. And they marched them all around that helipad that we had just made. And we had moved from there, so we were pretty lucky that day. The day before I got shot, I was walking point, and I was moving along, and all at once, there was a wire right under my nose that was stretched across the trail. I looked at it. One end of the wire was tied to a stick that was notched into a tree, and the other end of the wire was wrapped around this sapling that they had bent over and wrapped it around the sapling. So I called the squad leader up, and I asked, we looked at it, and there was nothing that we could see that it was hooked to anything else. So we dropped back. We got a grappling hook and dropped back with a rope on it and pulled this thing, and the sapling went poof, and nothing happened. So there was another instance that we were pretty lucky. When I got shot, I was walking, that was the next day. I was walking point that day too. And the guy behind me wasn't really keeping up. They like for us to spread apart, but still maintain eye contact with each other. And I would stop and I'd look back, and the guy wasn't there, so I'd drop down on one knee and wait for him to catch up. And this happened about 6 or 7 times. And the last time I stood up, and the enemy put a round in the stock of my rifle. He shot the ejection port of my rifle, and he shot the handguard of my rifle. And the extent of my wounds were a ricochet right there off the rifle, plus a lot of fragmentation off the handguard that got into my face. And I was only out of the bush for a couple weeks. I wasn't really wounded that bad. I had a friend that was shot the same time I was. His name was Neil Benor. He was from Toledo. He passed away just recently. And unfortunately, he came up, he was a machine gunner. The first guy that got to me was Doc Skip. And he told me, he said, "You're shot in the head, or you shot anywhere else?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, feel your body and see, make sure you're not shot anywhere else." And I did, and I wasn't. And I said, "Skip, you better get on the other side of me." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because the shooter's right there." Because the shooter wasn't 10 yards, but in the heavy jungle, you can't see him. When Neil got shot the same time I did, the third guy back, or the second guy back, came up, and he was being rather clumsy. He went down, we call it John Wayne. He went down to the ground, and he had to catch himself with the stock of the rifle, and he had his finger on the trigger, and the gun was on automatic, the rifle was on automatic, and he shot my friend Neil 3 times in the back. It was rough. Neil and I were medevac together. He's looking at me thinking, "Man, that guy has a wound to the head. He's a goner." And I'm looking at Neil. He's been shot in the chest, or in the back, but it came out his chest. He had the foamy blood. And I'm thinking, "Oh, he's a goner." Well, then about 15 years later, we had a reunion up in Washington, D.C., and found out that he was alive and well, and he found out I was alive and well. So I went to visit him up in Toledo quite a bit. I was in Vietnam with boots on the ground from April to August. And then we got pulled out. We went on a float from there. I was overseas for 13 months, but we went to the Philippines and Taiwan. I was on the USS Tripoli at this time. We were ready action. We would go sit off the coast of Vietnam and if someone needed help, we would go in, but we never had to do that. After Vietnam, I got married. We lived in California. When I checked into the reception center, a guy there by the name of Terry Booth, I'll never forget him because he had read my record and saw that I had a little bit of college, and he said, "Do you want to work here or do you want to go with the infantry unit up in San Onofre?" And there was no hesitation that I wanted to work there, which I did. That job led to a job as the audit and instruction team, and then that led to a job called McDosset, Marine Corps Dispersing On-Site Examination Team. My wife and I lived out in California at Camp Pendleton for 2.5 years. I was discharged July 21st of 1972. I ended up going back to college on the GI Bill. I got a Bachelor of Science degree in business. I worked as a savings and loan examiner for 31 years. I was an examiner, and then I moved up as a field manager of examiners. And we pretty much covered all of Ohio, or a large part of Ohio. And I also went on some special assignments out in Texas, California, Florida. But Texas was particularly interesting because this was during the savings loan crisis, and had some pretty interesting experiences out there in Texas because at that time, I would say there wasn't a healthy bank or savings loan in Texas. So it was pretty interesting. It means for 50 years I've lived with the story and never told anybody. And to be asked to tell the story means a lot. Because I don't think anybody really in West Liberty knew what Mike and I went through, and others. I mean, I'm not the only one. And being in West Liberty, it's admirable that they're coming together with this. It means a lot. It does. After we had the Purple ceremony up there, my daughter texted me and she said, "Proud daughter." Well, that made me feel very touched. We were out of water a lot. We were up in the Central Highlands, up in Quang Tri Province, and one day we were out of water, and we're pretty desperate. I mean, to the point of digging roots, sucking the juice out of the roots of bamboo grass or bamboos. And we moved up on this hill, and they were going to resupply us with water. Well, we were in an area that the helicopter couldn't land, so they were going to drop water. They were these canisters, I believe they were bomb canisters, or shell canisters for artillery. They filled them up with water and put them in a net, come to our position and drop them by net. Well, when they do that, they clean the bomb canisters out with Clorox. But in this case, they forgot to empty the Clorox out of the bomb canisters. So when we got to them and opened them up, they were contaminated. And we spent the rest of the night very thirsty, very thirsty. Christmas of '68, when Mike and I was in boot camp, we spent in a bowling alley in Anaheim, California on Christmas. And Mike and I and some other fellows were all trying to call home, but the telephone lines were jammed up. And that was a pretty sad time, not being able to call home. First Christmas away from home, not being able to call home. John Daglione, he lives in Texas. We were out humping the bush, and word came back, friendly's on the right. So I turned to John, and John was standing there ready to shoot this guy. It was a Vietnamese standing over about 10 yards from us. And I said, John, friendly's on the right. And he didn't shoot the guy. And to this day, we don't know if he was a friendly on the right or if he was the enemy. We were out on patrol one time, and I almost tripped over a unexploded napalm canister, which was tough. I was a tunnel rat one time. I like to tell people, they say that tunnel rats are usually for the small guys because they can get in the tunnel. That's not really true. It's the new guys that they put in those tunnels. The time I had to go down through a tunnel, there was nothing there, so it's really uneventful. Being out on search and destroy missions, we were in firefights quite a bit. There was one period of time that we ran into the enemies every day for 7 days, was in a firefight. I lost a lot of good friends over there. One instance, we were on this hill, a jet flew right over our heads. We had sent a patrol out. Well, let me back up. We were supposed to go out on patrol from this hill, and what we believed was a 105 howitzer or 105 round and a Russian claymore exploded right where our command post had set up, and we lost, I believe it was 7 guys that day. And so we didn't have to go out on patrol. They sent another squad out. Well, then they called in airstrikes on this hill because the patrol that went out, they really hit it hard. The enemy was on this other hill, and they really ran into a difficult time. So they called in airstrikes, and I remember being in my foxhole looking at this happening in front of me, and all at once a jet, I don't know what it was a jet airplane came treetop high right over my head, dropping his napalm right, and I got down in my foxhole, but the napalm didn't hit till it got to that other hill. So my fire team, Corporal Carter was in charge of the fire team. There was 3 of us, myself, Corporal Carter, and Jim Tonkamal. They sent us out to pull these were Marines, friendly bodies off of this hill, and because they were dead, they were obviously dead, and so that was a tough time too. Do I regret going in the Marine Corps? None at all, because I think the Marines gave me what I have now, having survived Vietnam. Because when I was at Camp Pendleton, having that experience, or getting that experience at Camp Pendleton with the Marine Corps dispersing on-site examination team really looked good on my resume when I got a job as a bank examiner, federal bank examiner. I would encourage anybody to go in the service because there's a lot more opportunity out there than there is back, being a civilian. They train you. I went to school on the GI Bill. I went to college on the GI Bill. So there's a lot to be gained by being in the military, and a lot of memories to keep. A lot of the guys that were in my squad, we maintained contact with each other. There's John Gaglione in Texas. There's Glenn Oberst, lives in Fort Scott, Kansas. There's Doc Skip, and his name's Alan Skirma. He lives over in Pennsylvania. I see him quite a bit. Larry Noon lives in, well, now he lives in Myrtle Beach. He used to live in New York. Red Herman lives in Canton. Wayne Armstrong lives in Sarasota. Butch Payton who was my squad leader, lives in Fort Myers, and I go down for the sunshine and to visit them quite often. We've had reunions. It's always a good time. Tell war stories and tell the same stories over and over. Doc Skip, I always like to tease him because he was a corpsman, a Marine corpsman, Navy corpsman. And I called him a medic one time, and he said, "I'm not a medic, I'm a Marine corpsman." I said, "I'm sorry, Skip, I'm sorry."